Luke's hands trembled as he held the letter. The script was unmistakably Susanna's, flowing and precise, just as he remembered it. But it was impossible. Susanna had been dead for 5 years. The letter arrived in an ordinary envelope with no return address, just his name centered boldly. Could it truly be from her? He stared at the envelope, a mundane object that now seemed imbued with inexplicable significance. His heart raced, a mix of fear and a bizarre sense of anticipation. Tearing open the envelope, he unfolded the letter and began to read, his eyes absorbing the familiar handwriting, his mind struggling to comprehend the words. "Luke, this has been so hard for me to be away from you. I just really need to speak to you again. It's taken time, but I'm in a better place now than I was. Even then, I want to hear from you one last time. Even if we can't embrace again, we can still talk, can't we? It's okay if you don't want to write back because it's too difficult. I'll understand. But can you try at least once for me? I will await your consideration. Yours forever, Susanna." The letter shook Luke to his core. It sounded just like her tone, her gentle pleading. It was too real, too vivid. Overwhelmed, he considered burning the letter to end the madness that threatened to rekindle old grief. But curiosity and a haunting sense of what if held his hand. Deciding against the fire, Luke placed the letter on his desk and tried to continue with his day. But the words haunted him, echoing in his mind. That night, he barely slept, the letter's presence in his home a palpable force that wouldn't let him rest. The following morning, another letter arrived. Identical in appearance to the first, it lay on his doorstep, as if waiting for him. Heart-pounding, Luke picked it up with a surreal expectation. Opening this one, he found similar words from Susanna, further expressing her longing and her ethereal existence. This pattern continued, with letters arriving daily. Each message plunged Luke deeper into confusion and a desperate need for answers. Was it possible that Susanna was reaching out from beyond? Or was he losing his grip on reality? Determined to find clarity, Luke decided to involve someone else, someone who could verify the letter's authenticity. He invited his brother over, hoping for support and another perspective. "So, what is this you invited me over for?" Sounded important. His brother asked, settling into the couch with a curious look. Luke hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "This is going to sound weird, but hear me out." He handed over the letter. His brother took it, scanning the page quickly. It's blank, Luke." "What?" "No, it's not. Look, it's Susanna's handwriting. It's right there." Luke's voice rose in frustration, his finger jabbing at the page. His brother gave him a long, hard look, concern etching his features. "Luke, there's nothing here. It's just a blank piece of paper." Confusion and dread knotted in Luke's stomach. He saw the words as clearly as he saw his own hands. How could his brother not see them?
"Listen, I think you need help, Luke. This isn't healthy."
His brother said softly, standing to leave.
"And don't talk about this to me again. It's a waste of my time and energy."
Left alone, Luke stared at the letter. The words were there, as clear as day. Realizing only he could see them, he felt an icy chill of isolation. Determined to understand, Luke penned a response to Susanna, expressing his confusion and fear, his longing for her, and his tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they were still connected in some inexplicable way. He placed his reply in the mailbox, raising the flag with a sense of finality. Whether madness or miracle, Luke had stepped into a mystery that would change his life forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of his neighborhood, Luke paced back and forth in his living room. The letters, now a stack of nearly a dozen, were spread out on the coffee table, each bearing unseen words that only he could read. With each new message, the voice of his deceased wife, Susanna, seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. That evening, as Luke was about to shut his front door, a soft knock startled him. He opened it to find his neighbor, Janet, standing under the porch light, an umbrella in her hand and a concerned look on her face.
"Luke, are you all right? I saw your brother leave the other day. He seemed upset.
Janet said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation.
I'm fine, Janet, just dealing with some personal things.
Luke replied, hesitating to reveal the truth about the letters. Janet's eyes fell on the scattered envelopes. What's all this then? Bills getting out of hand? Something like that. Luke muttered, but the lie felt heavy on his tongue. Janet picked up one of the envelopes, turning it over in her hands. If you need someone to talk to, Luke, I'm here. We all need help sometimes. Luke considered her offer. Janet had always been a good friend. Perhaps she could see something he couldn't. Actually, Janet, there is something. But you must promise to keep an open mind. Janet nodded, her expression serious.
Of course, Luke.
He handed her the most recent letter. Tell me what you see. Janet unfolded the paper, her brow furrowing. It's blank, Luke. A sigh escaped him. You don't see any writing? No, nothing. Why? Should I? Luke rubbed his temples, frustration mounting.
I see letters from Susanna. She writes to me, but no one else can see the words. It's driving me crazy.
Janet looked at him, her skepticism apparent.
Susanna? Luke, she's dead, I know. But I read her words every day.
Luke's voice broke with the strain of his own belief. Janet set the letter down, her demeanor softening. Luke, maybe it's grief. You never really moved on, did you? Before Luke could respond, another knock echoed through the house. This time, when he opened the door, a middle-aged man in a suit stood there, holding a briefcase. Mr. Luke Henderson? My name is Robert Clark. I'm a private investigator. May I have a moment of your time? Curiosity piqued, Luke led Robert into the living room, where Janet watched with wide eyes.
I understand this may sound unusual, but I've been hired by a client who believes they're connected to the phenomenon occurring to you. The letters, Mr. Henderson.
Robert explained, his eyes glancing at the coffee table. Connected? How? Luke asked, his interest overtaking his skepticism. My client, they've received similar correspondences from loved ones who are no longer alive. They believe someone might be targeting individuals like yourself, manipulating emotions for unknown reasons. Janet gasped.
That's dreadful! But who would do such a thing? That's what I'm here to find out.
Robert said. With your cooperation, we might get some answers. My client wishes to remain anonymous for now, but they have resources that could help us. Luke felt a flicker of hope.
What do you need from me? Permission to investigate these letters more closely. Perhaps even set up surveillance to catch anyone delivering them.
Robert suggested. Relief washed over Luke. Finally, someone believed him, or at least didn't dismiss the bizarre reality of his situation outright. Yes, anything to get to the bottom of this. As Robert set up his equipment, including cameras and audio recorders, Luke sat down with Janet, her presence a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of his once ordinary life.
Thank you for staying, Janet. I didn't realize how much I needed a friend tonight.
Luke said, offering her a weak smile. Janet reached out, squeezing his hand.
Whatever happens, I'm here. We'll figure this out together.
Together, they watched as Robert worked, each camera click a step closer to unraveling the mystery. The night grew deep, and the house filled with the low murmur of whispered theories and the clicking of camera shutters. Luke felt a strange sense of anticipation, a hope that soon, he might not only understand the source of the letters, but also reconnect with the world he thought he'd lost. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitors displaying the feeds from the newly installed cameras around Luke's house. Robert, the private investigator, scanned the screens intently, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. Luke and Janet sat on the couch, a sense of uneasy anticipation hanging between them.
It's almost midnight! Do you really think someone will show up?
Luke whispered, his eyes flicking to the clock. Robert didn't look away from the monitors. If someone's playing games, they might not stick to any predictable schedule. But we'll be ready whenever they do. The night dragged on, each hour marked by the silent tick of the clock and the occasional shuffle of feet. Janet dozed off briefly, her head lolling against the back of the couch. Luke, however, remained wide awake, his nerves frayed by the tension of waiting for an unseen adversary. Suddenly, a soft beep sounded from one of the monitors. Robert sat up straighter, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "There's movement at the back door," he announced quietly. On the screen, a shadowy figure appeared, moving with a cautious, almost spectral grace. They approached the back door, a small package in hand.
"That's got to be them!"
Luke hissed, starting to rise. "Stay back," Robert commanded. "Let's see what they do." The figure reached the door, pausing to look around before sliding the package through the mail slot and then quickly retreating into the darkness.
"Got them!"
Robert said with a grim satisfaction.
"Let's go out and see if we can catch up."
They rushed outside, the cold night air biting at their skin. Robert led the way, moving towards where they had seen the figure disappear. Janet clung to Luke's arm, her earlier skepticism forgotten in the face of the night's developments. They rounded the corner of the house, only to find the alleyway empty. The figure had vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of damp earth and a quiet rustle as a cat darted away into the shadows.
"Damn, they're fast,"
Robert muttered, scanning the area with a flashlight. But they left the package. "Let's check it." Back inside, Luke carefully opened the new letter, his hands shaking. Janet and Robert watched, a mix of fear and curiosity etched on their faces. The letter was short, and Luke read it aloud.
"Stop looking for answers you are not prepared to understand. Let the past remain where it is." "What does that even mean?"
Janet breathed, looking over Luke's shoulder.
"It's a warning."
Robert said, his voice tense.
"Someone doesn't want you digging deeper." "But why? What are they trying to hide?"
Luke wondered aloud, frustration coloring his tone.
"That's what we need to find out."
Robert replied, folding his arms.
"I'll take this letter back to my lab, see if there are any prints or anything else we can use to identify our mystery visitor."
As Robert packed up his equipment, Luke sat back down, the weight of the situation settling heavily on him. Janet stayed beside him, her presence a silent support.
"Thank you for helping me through this, Janet."
Luke said, managing a weak smile.
"I'm not going anywhere, Luke. We're going to figure this out together."
She assured him, squeezing his hand. With Robert gone, the house felt eerily quiet. Luke couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes of an unknown watcher were still upon him, hiding in the shadows just beyond the reach of the light. As dawn approached, bringing with it the first pale light of morning, Luke and Janet remained awake, too anxious to sleep, too afraid to let down their guard. The mystery of the letters, now more threatening than ever, hung over them like a dark cloud, promising more turmoil to come. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pale light through the curtains, Luke and Janet were still seated in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a long night's vigil. They hadn't spoken much since Robert had left. The weight of the warning in the letter hung heavily between them. Just as the silence was becoming unbearable, the sound of a car pulling up broke the stillness. Luke peered through the window to see Robert getting out, his expression grave. "Let's see what he found out," Luke murmured, standing to open the door. Robert entered, a folder in one hand and a small evidence bag in the other.
"Good morning, or whatever part of the day it is for you too."
He greeted them, though his tone was more businesslike than cheery.
"What did you find?"
Luke asked, his voice tense with anticipation. "I took the liberty of running some tests on the letters, including the latest one. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to trace directly. But I did find something interesting about the paper and ink." Robert explained, setting the folder down on the table and opening it to reveal several photographs. The paper is standard, but the ink is a rare type used mostly by artists for its permanence. It's not something you pick up at your local stationery store. Robert continued, his finger tracing over the images. So, someone's going out of their way to use special ink? What does that mean? Janet interjected, her brow furrowed.
It means they're careful, maybe professional. But here's where it gets more interesting.
Robert said, pulling out the small evidence bag. Inside was a tiny, crumpled piece of paper. Found this near the mailbox. It's a receipt from a local art supply store. It lists the same type of ink used on your letters. Luke's heart raced.
Can we find out who bought it?
That's the plan. I'm heading to the store as soon as we're done here, Robert said, already gathering his things. Wait, I'm coming with you. Luke decided on impulse. I need to see this through. Janet nodded in agreement. And I'm not staying here alone, not with everything that's going on. The trio arrived at the art store as it opened. Robert spoke with the clerk, showing him the receipt and asking about the purchase. After a few minutes, the clerk nodded and pointed to the security cameras. We keep footage for a few weeks. I can pull up the records for this purchase, he offered, leading them to a small office at the back of the store. The screen flickered as the clerk fast-forwarded through hours of footage. Then, he paused it, pointing to a figure standing at the checkout. The figure was hooded, making identification difficult, but as they paid, they looked up briefly. Luke gasped. The face was familiar, too familiar. It was Janet.
Janet? Why?
Luke turned to her, his voice a mix of betrayal and confusion. Janet sighed, her shoulders slumping.
I knew Susanna, Luke. We were friends years ago. When she died, you were so lost, so broken. I thought if I could bring her back, even just in letters, it might help you heal. But why not tell me? Why the secrecy?
Luke's confusion deepened into a mix of anger and sadness.
I thought if you knew it was from me, it wouldn't help. You had to believe it was Susanna.
Janet confessed, her voice trembling. Luke was silent, processing the revelation. His feelings were a tangle of gratitude and betrayal, comfort and loss. Robert stepped in, his tone gentle. It's a lot to take in, Luke. But maybe it's time to let go of the past, to find peace. Luke looked at Janet, his eyes softening.
I don't know if I can forgive this, not yet. But thank you for caring enough to try.
As they left the store, the sun was high in the sky, casting shadows behind them. Luke felt a sense of closure, not complete, but enough to start mending the fragments of his past. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it, ready to move forward, beyond the shadows of grief and deception, into a new light.